Hello and welcome to this Actor Thomas video, which is a facts and date video about a member of the royal family. Now, in this video we're going to be talking about Prince Edward, the Duke of Kent and Strathmore, who was the father of Queen Victoria. Now, he was the sixth child of King George III and his wife, Queen Charlotte. And very much like the rest of their children, he was brought up in reasonably happy childhood with the other children, governors, governesses, private tutors, the lot, in a number of royal households. Then, when he grew up, he joined the army, and he then went on to, after some basic training, went off to Germany and carried on his training over in Germany. Also went to university over there to study further for his education, so he would become quite, he would know quite a lot about the world that he was meant to be going out to as a soldier and as a member of the royal family. After his training, basically a lot of things happened. He was sent over to Canada for a number of years, in which he was over there as not only as a soldier in that capacity, but also as to represent his father as the sovereign. Of course, at that point, Canada was, and still is, a part of the British Empire. So, and like I say, he over the time he was over there, he met with a number of well-respected politicians and businessmen and everything like that, and he became quite important in the day-to-day life of these people. Another thing that you need to talk about when it comes to Prince Edward was the fact that he over that time he had a few mistresses whilst in Canada, and even though it can never be proven, it is suggested that he may have had at least one illegitimate child over in Canada. Once he'd finished over in Canada, he was posted over Gibraltar in 1802, and he was made Governor of Gibraltar. And very similar things happened over there. He became very well connected to politicians, business people, all that sort of, and plus, of course, certain well-respected ladies. Also, and he had a number of affairs over there. During that time, of course, things started to change dramatically for him, and by the end of his time in Gibraltar, he actually was forced out of the country, and his father had to make a promise basically to say he would never return to the country, even though he, as a member of the royal family, could go back. All of the people that he had offended had basically said that he can't return to the island. So he then returned to the UK in basic disgrace. So, during this time, of course, his niece, Princess Charlotte of Wales, had passed away. And this, of course, left a big problem for not only his father, not only his brothers, but himself, because there was now a large potential of who, after William, after Edward, who am I talking about? After George the Third and George the Fourth, who potentially would become the next sovereign. Of course, and at this point, no one had any illegitimate children. So, the race was on to try and find a number of women, over in Germany and around Europe that would be suitable to be wives for the children of the British king. And in a stroke of good luck, himself and his wife, who was a princess called Victoria, who was widowed with 2 young children at this point, got married in a double wedding with his elder brother, who we've already covered. And obviously the only problem is, once that had happened and the wedding had been all done and confirmed, there was the question of Edward's debts, which at this point was quite large. He had a number of debts that were mounting up year on year. And Victoria and her 2 children had wished to go back to Germany to live a simpler life, and because obviously life and expense, living an expensive life was a lot cheaper over in Germany. So they were potentially going to go over and live over Germany, which they did for a short amount of time. Then they found out that Victoria was pregnant, and when it came to almost I think about the 8-month pregnancy point, they decided to make the journey back to England, because George III would want his granddaughter, or his grandchild, if to become the sovereign, to be born back in the UK, which you can understand. So the journey was made, and Edward and Victoria arrived in London, set up home in Kensington Palace, and they waited for the birth of their first child. And when it happened, their daughter was born, and they named it Alexandrina Victoria. Of course, there was a number of different names suggested, but either the Prince Regent didn't like them, so he said no to most of them, and which was fair enough. Then, deciding that they should wait for a few years anyway until they moved back to Germany, they set up home down on the Devon coast, to where rents were considerably cheaper than they would be in London, and there was less chance of any more debts being accumulated if he was away from London. And Edward, his wife Victoria, her 2 children from her previous marriage, and baby Victoria went and moved down to the coast. And for a while everything seemed to be going quite well, until Edward got ill, and after a short illness he passes away in November 1820, leaving his now 2nd-time widowed wife and a 6-month-old baby girl, who of course no one at this point ever even considered would become queen. George the Fourth, just about to ascend the throne as their father is about to die a couple of weeks later, and then 10 years later their next brother, William the Fourth, takes onto the throne as well, leaving Victoria to go onto the throne a number of years later. So, I hope you found this video enjoyable, and I shall see you next time. Goodbye.